Officer, before you say another word, you may want to be absolutely certain about what you think you found. Danielle Brooks spoke without raising her voice, standing beside her dark gray sedan under the pale afternoon sun of Northern Virginia, while Officer Ryan Keller held up a small evidence bag, as though the entire story had already been decided. Traffic moved steadily along the four-lane road behind them. A delivery truck passed. A traffic signal changed from green to yellow. Somewhere nearby, a lawn mower hummed behind a row of office buildings. Everything around them felt ordinary, which only made Keller's confidence seem sharper. "This came from your vehicle," he said. Danielle looked at the bag, then at him. Her expression did not change. "Is that your statement?" Keller frowned. "I just told you what I found. Then I am asking whether you want that statement on the official record." For the first time, he hesitated. Only for a second. Then the certainty returned. "You should be more concerned about yourself right now." Danielle said nothing. 20 minutes earlier, she had left a secure interagency meeting less than 8 miles away, carrying no visible badge, no government jacket, and nothing that announced who she was. She wore a navy blazer, a cream blouse, dark slacks, and practical black shoes. Her sedan was intentionally unremarkable, the kind of car that disappeared into commuter traffic without attracting attention. That was how she preferred it. Danielle had spent most of her career learning that people revealed more when they believed no one important was watching. Keller had noticed her shortly after she turned onto Braddock Road. His patrol vehicle appeared behind her, followed for nearly half a mile, then activated its lights. Danielle pulled safely into a wide parking area beside a closed bank branch. Keller approached the driver's window and asked for her license and registration. She handed over both. "Do you know why I stopped you?" he asked. "No, officer." "You drifted toward the lane marker." Danielle glanced toward the road. "I do not believe I crossed it." Keller's mouth tightened. "I said you drifted toward it." There was something in the way he emphasized the words that made Danielle study him more carefully. Not fear. Assessment. She had interviewed suspects, supervised federal operations, and sat through enough internal investigations to recognize when a conversation was becoming less about facts and more about control. Keller asked where she was coming from. Danielle gave him a general answer. "A meeting." "What kind of meeting?" "Business." His eyes moved across the inside of the sedan. "Step out for me." Danielle paused. "For what reason?" Keller rested one hand near his belt and looked directly at her. "I am conducting an investigation." She stepped out calmly and stood several feet from the car while he continued questioning her. Then she saw it. Not directly. In the reflection of the passenger side window, Keller's hand moved near the open door for less than a second, disappearing from view and returning empty. Small. Quick. Almost invisible. Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly. Keller had no idea that the sedan was equipped with an internal security camera activated automatically during traffic stops involving senior federal personnel. He also had no idea that every second since his lights came on had been timestamped and stored remotely. Danielle remained still. Keller leaned into the passenger area, searched briefly, then straightened with the small bag in his hand. His expression changed into satisfaction. "Well," he said, "now we have a problem." Danielle looked at the bag again. Her heartbeat remained steady. She had already seen enough to understand what he was trying to do. But instead of accusing him, instead of revealing who she was, she gave him something far more dangerous than resistance. She gave him room to keep talking. Danielle Brooks kept her eyes on Officer Ryan Keller as he turned the small evidence bag beneath the afternoon light, examining it with the practiced confidence of someone who expected the discovery to end every question. "You understand what this means?" he said. Danielle glanced toward the sedan, then back at him. "I understand what you are claiming." Keller's jaw tightened. "I am not claiming anything. I found this inside your vehicle." Danielle let the silence sit between them. Cars continued moving along Braddock Road, tires whispering across warm pavement, while a woman leaving a nearby coffee shop slowed near the sidewalk and looked toward the flashing patrol lights. Keller noticed the bystander and raised his voice slightly. "Do you want to explain why this was in your car?" Danielle answered carefully. "I would rather hear you explain exactly where you found it." He pointed toward the passenger side, near the front seat. "Be specific." Keller stared at her. "Why?" "Because details matter." Something in her tone irritated him. He stepped toward the open passenger door and gestured inside. "Right there, beside the center console." Danielle looked at the location he indicated. And you are certain it was there before you entered the vehicle? Keller gave a short laugh, without humor. Are you accusing me of something? I asked whether you were certain. He did not answer immediately. Danielle watched the body camera mounted on his uniform. The small indicator light was active. Good. She had already noticed it during the first minute of the stop. Between his camera and the protected system inside her sedan, there would be two separate records of what had happened. Keller seemed unaware of the second one. That was important. He placed the evidence bag on the hood of his patrol vehicle and reached for his radio. Dispatch, I need an additional unit at my location. Danielle listened without interrupting. She knew exactly how this kind of moment could unfold when someone believed authority itself was proof. Keller returned his attention to her. I am going to need you to remain where you are. I have not moved. Then keep it that way. His tone was sharper now. Danielle studied him with the same patience she used during federal briefings when someone was talking too much because silence made them uncomfortable. She had learned years ago that people often revealed their reasoning when given enough room to defend it. Officer Keller, she said, reading the nameplate on his uniform. When you write your report, are you going to state that you personally observed the item beside the center console? Yes. And that no one else entered the vehicle before you located it? Correct. And that I remained outside the vehicle during your search? Keller paused. Yes. Danielle nodded once. Thank you. That response caught him off guard. For what? For being clear. In an operations center several miles away, a secure monitoring system had already registered the traffic stop. Danielle's sedan was assigned to a small pool of protected federal vehicles used by senior officials during sensitive meetings, and the system had automatically created an event log when the emergency lights were detected. A technician named Aaron Cole saw the notification appear on his screen, checked the vehicle identifier, and immediately sat straighter. He opened the live status panel. Driver identity confirmed. Director Danielle Brooks. Traffic stop active. Aaron reached for a secure phone. Back on the roadside, Keller began asking Danielle whether she had recently transported anyone in the vehicle. No. Anyone borrow it? No. Anyone else have access? Danielle thought for half a second. Authorized federal personnel. Keller narrowed his eyes. Federal personnel? That is what I said. He studied her clothing again, perhaps trying to decide whether the answer changed anything. What exactly do you do? Danielle looked toward him. This was the question he should have asked before deciding he knew the story. I work for the federal government. Keller smiled faintly. That covers a lot of people. It does. Which agency? Danielle did not answer immediately, not because she was hiding, because she wanted one thing established beyond doubt first. Before we discuss my employment, she said, I want to make sure I understand your position. You are stating, on camera, that you found that item inside my car. Keller glanced briefly at his body camera. The certainty returned to his face. That is exactly what I am saying. Danielle held his gaze. Somewhere miles away, a secure call was already being placed to Special Agent Marcus Hale. Keller believed the traffic stop was tightening around Danielle. He had no idea it was closing around him instead. Special Agent Marcus Hale answered the secure call on the second ring. Hale. Aaron Cole spoke quickly but clearly from the operations center. We have an active traffic stop involving Director Brooks. Protected vehicle system is recording. Local officer requested backup. There may be an evidence integrity issue. Marcus stopped walking. He had been halfway across the federal building lobby when the words reached him. What kind of issue? Aaron pulled up the synchronized video feeds. I am reviewing it now. On one screen, Danielle stood several feet from her sedan, composed and motionless. On another, the interior camera showed Officer Ryan Keller leaning through the passenger door during the search. Aaron slowed the footage. Hold on. Marcus waited. There is a hand movement near the center console before the officer announces a discovery. Silence. Can you confirm that? Marcus asked. Not yet. I can confirm the sequence. I am preserving the original file. Marcus turned toward the elevators. Notify federal security and contact the local watch commander. Do not interfere with the stop unless Director Brooks requests assistance or there is an immediate safety concern. Understood. Marcus ended the call and immediately made another. Back beside Braddock Road, Danielle watched Keller as a second patrol vehicle turned into the parking area. The arriving officer, Megan Foster, stepped out and approached with a cautious expression. Keller met her halfway and spoke quietly, but Danielle could still hear pieces of the conversation. Traffic stop. Vehicle search. Evidence recovered. Foster looked toward Danielle, then toward the evidence bag on the patrol vehicle. Did she consent to the search? She asked. Keller's expression tightened. I had probable cause. Based on what? He lowered his voice. Danielle did not interrupt. Foster looked again at the sedan. Was anything visible from outside? Keller paused. I had indicators. What indicators? Another pause. The confidence that had sounded so absolute minutes earlier was beginning to require explanation. Danielle noticed the shift immediately. Keller noticed it too. I have this handled, he said. Foster did not move. You requested another unit. Keller glanced toward Danielle. For scene security. Foster nodded, but her eyes remained on the evidence bag. Danielle understood something important in that moment. Keller had expected reinforcement. What he received was another witness. A warm breeze moved across the parking lot, carrying the smell of fresh asphalt from road work nearby. Danielle looked toward the sedan. The passenger door was still open. Her leather portfolio sat on the rear seat, untouched. Inside it was a federal credential wallet she had deliberately not produced yet. Not because she wanted drama, because the stop had already moved beyond identity. If she revealed herself now, Keller might suddenly become careful. He might change his language. He might reconsider statements he had already made. Danielle wanted the record to remain clean. Officer Keller, she said. He turned sharply. What? Am I being detained? Yes. For what specific offense? Keller looked toward Foster, then back at Danielle. Possession of suspected illegal material. Danielle nodded once. Based entirely on what you say you found inside my vehicle? Yes. And you are certain the item was already there when you searched? Keller exhaled. We have been through this. I want the record to be clear. Foster looked at Keller's body camera, then at Danielle. Something about her tone was beginning to make the second officer uneasy. Danielle did not sound frightened. She sounded like someone documenting testimony. Keller crossed his arms. Yes, I am certain. Danielle held his gaze for a moment, then said, All right. Foster finally addressed her. Ma'am, do you have identification beyond your driver's license? Yes. Keller gave a faint, dismissive smile. She says she works for the federal government. Foster's expression changed slightly. Which agency? Danielle looked at her. My credentials are in the leather portfolio on the rear seat. I would prefer that you retrieve them while your body camera is recording. Keller stared at her. Foster hesitated, then walked toward the sedan. Where exactly? Rear seat, passenger side. Foster opened the portfolio carefully and found a black credential wallet inside. She brought it back without opening it. Is this yours? Danielle nodded. Yes. Foster handed it to Keller. For the first time since the stop began, Danielle saw uncertainty pass fully across his face. He opened the wallet. His eyes moved from the photograph to the federal seal, then lower to the title printed beneath Danielle's name. The parking lot seemed to become very quiet. Foster leaned slightly closer. Keller read the line again, as though the words might change if he gave them enough time. Director, Drug Enforcement Administration. His face lost color. Danielle watched him without satisfaction, without anger, without triumph. She simply asked the question he had avoided since the beginning. Now that you know who I am, Officer Keller, would you like to reconsider anything you said before you knew? For several seconds, Officer Ryan Keller said nothing. The federal credential remained open in his hand, and the silence around the roadside stop seemed to deepen as Officer Megan Foster looked from the identification to Danielle Brooks and then back to Keller. His earlier certainty had vanished, replaced by the expression of a man suddenly aware that every word he had spoken was preserved somewhere beyond his control. Director Brooks, Foster said carefully, I think we need to slow this down. Danielle kept her voice even. That would have been useful 20 minutes ago. Keller finally closed the credential wallet. I did not know who you were. Danielle looked directly at him. That should not matter. The words were quiet, but they changed the shape of the moment. A driver's license had been valid whether she directed a federal agency or worked at the coffee shop across the street. Her right to fair treatment had not appeared when Keller read her title. It had existed before he ever turned on his patrol lights. Foster seemed to understand that immediately. Officer Keller, she said, do not handle anything else from the vehicle. Keller looked at her sharply. I already recovered the evidence. Then leave it where it is until a supervisor arrives. Keller glanced toward the evidence bag resting on the hood of his patrol vehicle. "You are treating me like I did something wrong," Foster answered without raising her voice. "I am preserving the scene." Danielle noticed the distinction. Procedure was finally entering a situation that had begun with assumption. At that same moment, a dark government sport utility vehicle turned into the parking lot and stopped several spaces away. Special Agent Marcus Hale stepped out with another federal investigator. Neither man rushed. Neither displayed a weapon. Marcus simply walked toward Danielle with his credentials visible and stopped several feet away. "Director Brooks, are you all right?" "I am fine." Keller stared at Marcus. "Who are you?" Marcus introduced himself, then looked toward Foster. The Drug Enforcement Administration Operations Center received an automated notification from the director's vehicle. The vehicle security system preserved video from the beginning of this stop. Keller's eyes moved toward Danielle's sedan. "Vehicle security system?" Marcus nodded. "Interior and exterior recording." The words landed slowly. Danielle watched Keller's face as he processed them. He looked toward the open passenger door, then toward the evidence bag, then at his own body camera. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the argument was no longer about whose version sounded more convincing. There were multiple recordings. Foster stepped away and contacted her watch commander. "I need a supervisor at my location immediately," she said into the radio. "Potential evidence integrity concern involving a federal official." Keller turned toward her. "Potential? Based on what?" Marcus answered before Foster could. "Based on a recording that may show a sequence inconsistent with your statement." Keller's expression hardened. "May show?" "The original file is being preserved for review," Marcus said. "No one here is going to decide what happened on the side of the road." Danielle appreciated that answer. It was exactly what she would have ordered herself. Preserve. Document. Review. Do not contaminate the facts with emotion. Keller looked at Danielle as if expecting her to accuse him now that federal agents had arrived. She did not. Instead, she asked Foster, "Is his body camera still recording?" Foster checked the indicator. "Yes." "Good. Please keep it running." Keller shook his head. "This is getting blown out of proportion." Danielle's expression remained calm. "Then the recordings should help establish that." Another patrol vehicle arrived several minutes later carrying Captain Laura Mitchell, Keller's watch commander. She approached the group with an expression that made clear she had already received enough information to know this was not an ordinary traffic stop. Foster briefed her first. Marcus explained the federal recording system next. Keller attempted to speak twice, but Mitchell raised one hand. "You will have an opportunity to provide a complete statement. Right now, no one touches the vehicle or the recovered item." She turned toward Danielle. "Director Brooks, I apologize for the delay while we preserve the scene." Danielle nodded. "Preserve everything, Captain, including the dispatch audio and the reason originally given for the stop." Mitchell looked toward Keller. "That will be done." Keller's confidence had now become something quieter and more fragile. He stood beside his patrol vehicle while the same authority he had relied on minutes earlier began demanding answers from him. Danielle felt no satisfaction in watching it happen. What disturbed her was something much larger. Keller had only become careful after learning her title. If there had been no federal credential, no protected vehicle, no internal camera, what would his report have said by sunset? And how many people before her had stood beside a road with nothing but their word against a badge? By late afternoon, the traffic stop had become a secured administrative scene rather than a roadside argument. Captain Laura Mitchell had separated the people involved, documented the location of the recovered item, and requested that Officer Ryan Keller remain available for questioning. Danielle Brooks stood near her sedan with Special Agent Marcus Hale, while another federal investigator confirmed that the vehicle recording had been preserved without alteration. No one was celebrating. No one was speaking loudly. The seriousness came from the opposite direction, from the realization that the facts were beginning to organize themselves. Marcus held a tablet at chest level and turned the screen toward Danielle. "The operations center finished the first sequence review," he said. "Do you want to see it now?" Danielle looked toward Keller, who stood beside Captain Mitchell several yards away. "Show me." Marcus opened the recording. The interior view displayed the passenger side of the sedan from the moment Danielle stepped out. The angle was not perfect, but it was clear enough to show Keller leaning inside, his right hand moving briefly toward the center console before withdrawing. Several seconds later, He reached back into the same area and produced the evidence bag. Danielle watched the sequence twice. Her expression stayed composed. "Preserve the full recording," she said. "Not just the clip." Marcus nodded. "Already done. And make sure the local department receives a certified copy through the proper channel." "They will." Danielle looked back toward Keller. What disturbed her was not the video itself. It was how ordinary the movement looked. A person watching casually might have missed it. A person without a protected camera system might never have known it happened. Captain Mitchell approached a few minutes later. "Director Brooks, I have reviewed the initial footage with Officer Foster. I am placing Officer Keller on administrative leave pending a formal investigation." Danielle nodded once. "That decision belongs to your department." Mitchell seemed surprised by the lack of emotion in her response. "I understand. What matters to me is that the investigation does not stop with this encounter." Mitchell studied her. "You think there may be others?" Danielle glanced toward the evidence bag, now secured and untouched. "I think the question should be asked." That evening, Keller sat in a plain interview room at his precinct. No patrol vehicle outside, no flashing lights, no roadside audience. The confidence he had carried on Braddock Road had been replaced by silence. An internal affairs investigator named Stephen Parker sat across from him, with Captain Mitchell present. The first questions were procedural. Why had he initiated the stop? What lane movement had he observed? What facts created probable cause for the search? Keller answered carefully. Then Parker placed a printed image on the table. It showed Keller leaning into the passenger side of Danielle's sedan. "Walk me through this moment." Keller looked at the image. "I was checking the area near the console." "Before or after you observed the item?" Keller paused. "Before." Parker wrote something down. "What caused you to focus on that specific area?" Another pause. "It looked suspicious." Parker looked up. "The area looked suspicious?" Keller shifted in his chair. "I mean the situation." "What about the situation?" Keller's eyes moved toward Mitchell. "She did not help him." Parker continued. "The vehicle recording shows your hand entering the exact location where you later stated you found the item. We are going to need a precise explanation." Keller looked down at the table. For the first time since the stop began, there was no stranger standing in front of him to question, no traffic noise, no badge to use as punctuation. Only a timeline. Only video. Only his own words. Across town, Danielle returned to the federal office and asked Marcus for one additional report before she left for the night. "Pull every complaint we can lawfully access involving Officer Keller and vehicle searches," she said. Marcus looked at her. "How far back?" Danielle thought about the roadside, the reflection in the window, the movement most people would never have noticed. 5 years, she said. "And do not search for a conclusion. Search for a pattern." By 9:30, the first records began arriving. Most were ordinary. A few were not. 3 separate motorists had previously challenged the origin of evidence documented after searches conducted by Keller. None of the complaints had been sustained. Danielle read the summaries in silence. Then she reached one line that made her stop. In each case, the driver had been black. She leaned back in her chair and looked through the darkened window at the lights of Northern Virginia. What began as one questionable stop was no longer asking one question. It was asking how many times the same story had been dismissed simply because there had been no second camera. The next morning, Danielle Brooks arrived at the federal office before sunrise, long before most of the building had filled with the familiar rhythm of phones, briefings, and hurried footsteps. A thin blue light pressed against the windows as Northern Virginia slowly woke beneath her, but Danielle barely noticed. 3 complaint files were open across the conference table. Each came from a different year. Each involved a different driver. Each described a vehicle search conducted by Officer Ryan Keller. And each contained the same kind of sentence buried inside official language. The driver disputed how the evidence had appeared. Special Agent Marcus Hale entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and another folder. "There is more," he said. Danielle looked up. Marcus placed the folder beside the others. A 4th complaint. 2 years ago, the driver said Keller searched the vehicle after a minor equipment stop. He claimed an item was found under the passenger seat. The complaint was closed because there was no independent video. Danielle opened the file. The driver was a black man named Terrence Cole, 41 years old at the time, employed by a regional utility company. His written statement was short. He had denied ownership of the item from the beginning. He had asked for camera footage. None existed beyond Keller's body camera. which did not clearly show the interior search. Danielle read the last page twice. Was the charge prosecuted? Dismissed later for unrelated evidentiary reasons. Was the complaint reopened? No. Danielle closed the folder slowly. Then we are not looking at one bad stop anymore. Marcus nodded. Internal Affairs reached the same preliminary concern. Across town, Keller sat in another administrative interview, this time with Stephen Parker and a departmental attorney present. The questions had changed. They were no longer focused only on Braddock Road. Parker placed 4 complaint summaries in front of him. Do you recognize these names? Keller scanned the pages. Not all of them. Do you recognize the stops? Some. Parker pointed to the oldest file. This driver disputed the origin of evidence found during your search. Keller leaned back. People dispute evidence all the time. That is true. Parker moved to the second file. So did this driver. Then the third. And this one. Keller's expression tightened. They were investigated. They were closed because there was not enough independent proof to sustain the complaints. Parker paused. That is not the same as proving the complaints were false. Keller looked toward the departmental attorney, but no one interrupted. Parker continued. Now we have a recording from Director Brooks's vehicle that may show a sequence consistent with what several previous complainants described. Keller's face changed. You are using one video to rewrite years of cases. No, Parker said. We are using one video to determine whether older cases deserve another look. Silence settled across the room. Back at the federal building, Danielle had moved from the complaint files to a secure conference call with Captain Laura Mitchell, Marcus Hale, and 2 legal advisors. Danielle's voice remained measured. I do not want federal authority used to predetermine the outcome. Mitchell answered immediately. Agreed. And I do not want this framed as a dispute between agencies. Agreed again. Danielle looked through the glass wall toward the waking office beyond the conference room. Then the priority is simple. Preserve the evidence. Recontact complainants where appropriate. Review the search documentation. Compare timestamps. Compare body camera sequences. Follow the facts. One of the advisors asked, do you want the Department of Justice notified? Danielle paused. Notify them of the potential pattern, not a conclusion. Marcus wrote the instruction down. After the call ended, Danielle remained seated while everyone else gathered their files. Marcus waited. You are thinking about something. Danielle looked at the complaint from Terrence Cole. Yesterday, I had 2 cameras, federal credentials, and people who answered the phone when my name appeared on a screen. Marcus said nothing. Danielle continued. Terrence Cole had a written statement. She tapped the page once. That should have been enough to make someone look harder. By noon, Internal Affairs had begun contacting the previous complainants. Terrence answered on the first call. When Stephen Parker explained why they wanted to speak with him again, there was a long silence on the line. Then Terrence asked one question. Did somebody finally get it on camera? Parker looked down at the Braddock Road case file. We have new evidence that requires us to review your complaint. Another pause. I told you what happened 2 years ago, Terrence said quietly. Nobody believed me. Parker did not defend the old decision. I know. At that same moment, Danielle stood alone near the window of her office, looking down at the morning traffic. She had spent a career believing that systems mattered because systems could correct individual failures. Now the test was whether this one would correct itself before another person had to be important enough to force it to listen. By early afternoon, the reopened complaints had stopped looking like scattered paperwork and started looking like a sequence. Terrence Cole arrived at the Internal Affairs office carrying a worn folder he had kept for 2 years, every page inside it organized by date. Stephen Parker met him in a small interview room and began with the same instruction he gave every witness. Tell me what happened in your own words. Do not try to match anyone else's account. Terrence nodded. He described a routine equipment stop, a search he had questioned from the beginning, and the moment Officer Ryan Keller claimed to find something beneath the passenger seat. I told him it was not mine, Terrence said. I told everyone afterward. I wrote it down. I filed the complaint. Then eventually people stopped calling. Parker looked at the folder. Why did you keep all of this? Terrence gave a tired smile. Because when nobody believes you, paperwork becomes the only witness you have left. Across town, Danielle Brooks sat with Marcus Hale, reviewing a timeline built from the 4 prior complaints. No 2 cases were identical. That mattered. Danielle did not want coincidence turned into certainty just because the pattern was disturbing. but several details repeated often enough to demand attention. Minor traffic reasons, searches concentrated near the passenger side, disputed evidence, incomplete camera angles, and reports written with nearly the same language. Marcus pointed to one column. 3 of the 4 searches happened after Keller positioned his body away from the camera. Danielle studied the timestamps. Can we establish intent from that? No. Then do not write intent. Marcus nodded. We can establish sequence. Write sequence. That distinction was becoming the center of everything. Facts first. Interpretation later. At the precinct, Keller was beginning to understand the same rule from the other side. Stephen Parker returned after Terrence's interview and placed a new transcript on the table. Keller glanced at it and looked away. He is saying the same thing he said 2 years ago. Yes. And nothing proved it then. Parker sat down. That is why we are reviewing it now. Keller folded his arms. Because Danielle Brooks is important. Parker held his gaze. Because a protected recording created new evidence. Her title is not what makes the recording relevant. Keller said nothing. Parker continued. But her title may be why this incident received immediate scrutiny, and that raises a separate question about whether previous complaints were examined closely enough. Keller's expression shifted. So now this is about the department too? It may be. For the first time, responsibility was expanding beyond one officer. Captain Laura Mitchell received a preliminary supervisory review showing that 2 earlier complaints involving Keller had been closed after short inquiries without requesting available dispatch metadata or interviewing all listed witnesses. She read the summary twice. The mistake was no longer simply what might have happened on the road. It was what the system had failed to do afterward. By 3:30, Danielle joined a secure meeting with Mitchell, Parker, Marcus, and departmental counsel. No cameras. No press. No speeches. Mitchell spoke first. We have enough to reopen all 4 complaints and conduct an independent audit of Keller's relevant vehicle searches. Danielle nodded. And the supervisory reviews. Included. Marcus added. The federal video has been authenticated. The sequence is unchanged from the original file. Danielle looked toward Parker. Does it prove what happened? Parker chose his words carefully. It proves that Keller's hand entered the area before he later reported discovering the item there. It does not, by itself, establish every element of intent. Combined with the statements and other records, it creates a serious evidence integrity concern. Danielle leaned back. That is the language I want used publicly if this becomes public. Mitchell looked surprised. You do not want stronger wording? I want accurate wording. Silence followed. Danielle continued. If we demand fairness when someone else is accused, we have to practice it when the evidence points towards someone we distrust. Later that afternoon, Parker called Terrence back into the room and told him the complaint had officially been reopened. Terrence stared at the document for several seconds before signing the acknowledgement. So what happens now, he asked. We investigate it again. Terrence looked down at the signature line. That is all I wanted the first time. Meanwhile, Keller sat alone after his interview ended, listening to the faint sounds of phones and footsteps beyond the closed door. He had spent years believing every closed complaint meant he had been cleared. Now he was learning something harder. Sometimes a closed file did not mean the truth had been found. Sometimes it only meant the system had stopped looking. By the following morning, the investigation had reached a point where silence was no longer possible. Internal Affairs had authenticated the federal vehicle recording, reopened 4 previous complaints, and identified enough overlap to justify a broader review of Officer Ryan Keller's search history. Captain Laura Mitchell stood in a conference room with Stephen Parker and 2 department attorneys while a timeline covered nearly an entire wall. Dates, traffic stops, search locations, complaint numbers, disputed evidence. Each item alone could be explained. Together, they demanded an answer. Parker pointed to a cluster of cases from the previous 3 years. These are the searches with incomplete interior camera coverage. Mitchell studied the list. How many involved black drivers? Parker looked down at his notes. Most of them. No one spoke for several seconds. Mitchell finally said, do not overstate that until the full sample is reviewed. Parker nodded. Agreed. Across town, Danielle Brooks was already at her desk when Marcus Hale entered with a sealed packet. Preliminary audit results, he said. Danielle opened it carefully. The first page did not contain conclusions. It contained questions, which she preferred. Were certain drivers searched more frequently after minor stops? Were searches concentrated in locations difficult for body cameras to capture? Were complaints reviewed consistently regardless of the driver's identity? Danielle read every line. "This is better," she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Better? It asks what can be tested." She closed the packet. "That is how you keep outrage from becoming assumption." Marcus sat across from her. "There is another development. One of the previous complainants had a passenger who was never interviewed." Danielle looked up. "Why not? The original report says the witness could not be reached. And now, we found her. Her name was Alicia Monroe, a school administrator who had been riding with her cousin during a stop 18 months earlier. When Parker interviewed her that afternoon, she remembered one detail with surprising clarity. Keller had asked both occupants to stand behind the vehicle while he searched the front passenger area. Alicia said she had watched him through the side mirror because she was worried about her purse. "Did you see him place anything inside the car?" Parker asked. Alicia shook her head. "I cannot say that." "What did you see?" His hand went down near the seat before he said he found something. Parker did not react. "Did you report that at the time?" "I told my cousin. Nobody asked me for a statement." That sentence went straight into the file. Not proof by itself, but another piece of sequence evidence. At the precinct, Keller was called into a formal administrative meeting with his representative present. Captain Mitchell sat across from him with Parker. She spoke carefully. "The department is expanding the review. You will remain on administrative leave." Keller looked exhausted rather than defiant. "How long?" "Until the evidence is evaluated." He looked at the stack of files. "So every stop I ever made is being treated like a crime now?" Mitchell answered immediately. "No. Every relevant stop is being reviewed to determine whether procedure was followed and whether previous complaints were handled properly." Keller leaned back. "And if you find nothing? Then the record will show that." "And if you find something?" Mitchell held his gaze. "Then the record will show that too." For the first time, Keller did not argue. He looked down at the table and said quietly, "I thought I knew what I was seeing." Parker heard the sentence, but did not respond. Later, when Danielle was briefed, Marcus repeated it to her. He said he thought he knew what he was seeing. Danielle stood near the window, watching commuters move along the highway far below. "That is how these things begin," she said. "Not with certainty. With an assumption that starts behaving like certainty." Marcus asked whether she wanted to issue a public statement. Danielle shook her head. "Not about him." "Then about what?" She turned from the window. "About process." By late afternoon, the department announced an independent review of selected vehicle searches, body camera positioning, complaint handling, and evidence documentation procedures. Keller's name appeared only where legally necessary. Danielle insisted on that. She did not want a spectacle. She wanted a record strong enough to survive scrutiny. That evening, Terrence Cole received another call from Internal Affairs. This time, Parker told him that his original complaint would be reinvestigated with the newly located witness and updated evidence review. Terrence was quiet for a long moment. "So somebody finally looked past the officer's report?" he asked. Parker answered honestly. "We are looking at everything." Terrence exhaled. "That is more than I got before." When Danielle heard about the call, she closed the final folder on her desk and sat in silence. The investigation had started with what happened to her on one roadside. Now it was becoming about something larger, whether a system could admit that listening too late was still better than never listening at all. 3 weeks later, the final administrative report arrived on Danielle Brooks's desk just after 8 in the morning. It was thicker than she expected, nearly 200 pages of timelines, witness statements, authenticated video records, supervisory reviews, and reconstructed search sequences. She did not open it immediately. For several seconds, she simply looked at the sealed folder and remembered the roadside where everything had begun. Officer Ryan Keller's patrol lights, the empty parking lot, the evidence bag in his hand, and the confidence in his voice before he knew who she was. Marcus Hale stood near the conference table waiting quietly. "The department completed its findings," he said. Danielle broke the seal and began reading. The report concluded that Keller had violated evidence handling procedures during her stop and had provided statements inconsistent with the authenticated vehicle recording. 2 earlier complaints had also been sustained after investigators located witnesses and reviewed records that had not been fully examined the first time. Other complaints remained unresolved because too much time had passed and the evidence was incomplete. Danielle appreciated that distinction. Justice was not supposed to fill empty spaces with whatever answer felt satisfying. Captain Laura Mitchell had also ordered a broader departmental review of complaint procedures, body camera positioning, vehicle searches, and supervisory oversight. Keller would no longer serve in an enforcement role while formal disciplinary proceedings moved forward. Danielle closed the report halfway through and looked at Marcus. What about Terrence Cole? His case was referred for independent legal review. The department also issued him a formal notice acknowledging that his original complaint was not investigated thoroughly enough. Danielle nodded slowly. And Alicia Monroe? Her statement is part of the reopened record. Danielle turned another page. Near the end was a recommendation requiring supervisors to compare new evidence integrity complaints against previous reports instead of treating each one as an isolated event. That sentence mattered to her more than Keller's disciplinary status. One officer could leave. A broken process could remain for decades. Later that afternoon, Danielle attended a closed interagency meeting with Mitchell, Stephen Parker, federal counsel, and community oversight representatives. Keller was not present. His proceeding was separate, exactly as it should have been. Mitchell summarized the reforms without defending the department or dramatizing its failures. When she finished, she looked toward Danielle. Director Brooks, is there anything you want added? Danielle folded her hands on the table. Yes, one thing. The room became quiet. Do not build a policy that protects people because they might turn out to be important. Mitchell held her gaze. Danielle continued. Build one that protects them because they are people. No one interrupted. When Officer Keller stopped me, my title was sitting inside a portfolio on the back seat. My rights were not. Those were already with me. Stephen Parker lowered his pen. Danielle's voice remained steady. If this system only became concerned because the person on that roadside happened to direct a federal agency, then we have misunderstood the entire lesson. 2 days later, Terrence Cole stood outside the Internal Affairs office holding a copy of the reopened findings. He called Danielle through an intermediary because he wanted to thank her. She declined the praise when they finally spoke. You told the truth before I ever met Officer Keller, she said. The problem was not that you needed my story. The problem was that your story should have been enough. Terrence was silent for a moment. It feels strange hearing somebody say that. It should not. Months later, Danielle drove the same dark gray sedan along Braddock Road after another interagency meeting. The afternoon light looked almost identical. She passed the closed bank branch where Keller had stopped her and slowed slightly at the traffic signal. No patrol lights appeared behind her. No one recognized her. No one needed to. When the signal turned green, she continued toward Washington with both hands steady on the wheel. She had never wanted revenge. She had wanted the record corrected, the forgotten voices heard, and the system forced to examine what it had once dismissed. Keller had believed a badge gave his assumptions the weight of truth. Danielle had proven something quieter and stronger. Authority can create a story, but evidence decides whether that story survives. And justice means nothing if it only arrives after learning someone's title.